Welcome to this session of the Ancestral Healing Summit. I'm Lisa Bonnies, your host, and my guest for this session is Sharon DiBartolo-Carmack. Our topic today is the Genealogy Medium's Guide to Healing Your Ancestors and Yourself. Sharon DiBartolo-Carmack is a certified genealogist and certificate holder in demonstrating mediumship. To her knowledge, Sharon is the only person in the U.S. to have credentials in both mediumship and genealogy. She's the author of 27 books, including the biography In Search of Maria B. Hayden, the American medium who brought spiritualism to the UK, and her newest book, a memoir, Midlife Medium, A Genealogist's Quest to Converse with the Dead. Sharon, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so looking forward to our time together. Welcome.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm looking forward to it as well.
I'm fascinated by your work. I've read your book, Midlife Medium, and again, it is fascinating. And in the book, let's start here. You talk about healing the relationship with your mother after she died. Let's start there. Tell us about that.
Okay, yeah, that is a good place to start. My mother and I had kind of a rocky relationship, starting in teenage years, is so common with daughters and mothers. And in her lifetime, I'm an only child, and my mother was, in my opinion, probably was not the best mother for me. I wanted a more lenient mother, and she was a more controlling mother. And so we had a very rocky relationship that fell into my adulthood. We got along, but it was still not the best relationship. So after she passed, of course, when someone passes, that's when you review all of your relationships with that person. Did I do everything I could have? Was I kind enough to that person? And you go through that whole thing. For me, it was guilt, because I didn't feel like I was a very good daughter, despite the fact that I also didn't feel she was a very good mother. I wasn't a very good daughter. I shared in the responsibility of our relationship. And so in that process, after she passed, I was on my journey to become a medium. And so I knew she was still with me. And I knew that we could still heal our relationship. So what I would do as I was in the process of developing my mediumship and learning more about spiritualism and learning more about the spirit world, I decided I needed to heal this relationship. I didn't want to wait till I got to the spirit world to heal it. I wanted to heal it now. And so I would send out emotions of apologies. I would talk to her like I wasn't able to talk to her here in the physical world, because it was just too uncomfortable for me and it made it uncomfortable for her. So I was able to say all the things that I couldn't say while she was here. I think that's actually one of the blessings when one of our loved ones cross over. We can now say what we really wanted to say. And so I not only sent apologies to her, as well as my love, and that I was sharing responsibility in our relationship, but through other mediums, I would hear from her with her own apologies and with her understanding and realizing her role in the relationship as well. And at one point, I just felt like we were done. We had healed. We understood each other, and our relationship was on the right track now.
It's interesting that you say that you heard through other mediums, because I had a similar thing where many mediums were telling me, your mom has messages. I wasn't hearing from her specifically. Was there a reason that you needed to hear through other people, do you think?
I think one of the reasons that it's important to hear it through other mediums is because then you don't doubt yourself. If you do hear it for yourself, and I will tell you, there was one instance when I did. you doubt it and you think this is just my imagination, I'm making this up, and then you never really know. But when you hear it from a medium who doesn't know you, who doesn't know your mom, and they're telling you things that you need to hear because of this rocky relationship, all of a sudden it's believable and you trust it. Now, the one time where I did receive, well, there are probably many other times, but in fact there were, now that I think about what I wrote in Midlife Medium, there were several times. But the one time that really stands out is when I had a dream about her. And we often talk about those dreams that make total sense, that seem so real. We refer to those as spirit visitations. And she visited me in a dream. And I didn't get to say goodbye to her. I wasn't there when she passed. And she gave me the opportunity to say goodbye to her and to talk to her then. And so I feel like that was another validation that she was hearing me and she was understanding what I was trying to do in healing our relationship. So I think they do communicate in different ways. The question is whether or not you believe it's really them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you for letting me ask that. No, so what's your background in healing?
Well, I think all mediums are healers. I mean, there's just no doubt in my mind, because the messages we deliver, the spirits we connect with for either our clients or people in an audience or whatever, it's all healing. It's all healing. So I think mediums are all healers. So my background started when I started becoming a medium, but I also took some courses and read a lot of books on spiritual healing, in particular by Harry Edwards, who was one of the greatest healers of the 20th century. I read all of his books and started practicing healing the way he recommends doing it. Plus, I also took Reiki classes and I took shamanic healing classes as well. And then I took some and read a lot about medical intuitive readings, which I also feel are very healing. So I have a varied background in healing.
Yeah. And then, of course, you've got this genealogy background. I love the combination of those two worlds because for me, you really, I shouldn't say you can't do one without the other, but it makes for a fascinating chocolate in your peanut butter combination. So let's talk about that. In your experience, how does genealogy really, sort of weave in well with ancestral healing?
Well, not all genealogists are mediums and not all mediums are genealogists, but I agree with you. I think the two go well together. I think when someone starts to research their ancestors, the ancestors perk up and take notice. I think they realize, oh, somebody's talking about me, somebody's looking for me. And I think depending on the ancestor, I think most want to be found in the records, but I think some put those roadblocks in our way, and so they're more difficult to find. But I do think just the act of researching your ancestors sends out that vibration, sends out that energy that, hey, somebody's interested in me. Somebody wants to know my life story. When I became a medium, and that was my whole quest in writing Midlife Medium, can it improve my genealogy to become a medium? And I think it did, because I'm more aware now of subtle hints or subtle nudges or whatever that I wasn't aware of before. When I was writing my book, In Search of Maria B. Hayden, and I'm not related to Maria at all, when I was researching her, there were twists and turns in the research I don't think I would have normally taken, but I was open to those nudges. I was open to that inspiration from her and said, look here, where normally I don't think I would have looked in those spots. And so I think in developing mediumship, along with being a genealogist, I'm more aware of what our ancestors the direction they're pointing us into. That's not to say I'm a super genealogist any more than I'm a super medium. I'm just saying that the two have opened my awareness a lot more to our ancestors.
Yeah, yeah. And well, in Hank Jones's work, he talks about how when you're really into the whole genealogical groove, these amazing synchronicities will occur. And you touched on that a bit. And you also mentioned, this was interesting, that sometimes they will block your research. Wow. Talk about that a bit, if you would.
Well, this is just my own personal opinion. I have nothing, I have no facts to back it up. But I just think, well, if there are those ancestors who want to be found, there also have to be those ancestors who don't want to be found for whatever reason. They don't want you digging in their past, just like people today. I would have a problem with people digging into my past right now. I mean, once I'm dead, that's different. But the same thing happens in the spirit world. Some people just don't want their stories told. They just don't want you to know about them for whatever reason. Either they're embarrassed by something or they want to keep something private. They're just not ready. Yet 10 years later, you could do research on that same person and all of a sudden those brick walls fall down. Why is that?
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if maybe when that happens, because I relate to that maybe you need to grow up a little bit so that you can hear their story with more compassion and understanding about maybe why they acted the way they acted. Do you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. And the other aspect of my genealogical journey is learning how to put ancestors into historical perspective. What is a scandal today may not have been a scandal 100 years ago. Okay, for some people, abortion is a scandal. Back more than 100 years ago, when it wasn't illegal, when it was common because there were no reliable means of birth control, when women either took abortifacients, chemicals, or they sought a surgical abortion, it wasn't looked down upon because there weren't any methods to control family size. So it wasn't a scandal. Yet today, if we consider it a scandal, we look back on it as a scandal. But if we do the social history research, if we find out what life was like, how common was this, then we realize, hey, we're putting our judgments onto their lives, our personal opinions onto their lives. And maybe that's why they don't want us to find them.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. Now, I'm also thinking of just the way that society is shifting. As I've told you in the past, I'm working on a story about my ancestors' experience coming over from Scotland, and I just found and on the ship manifest that my great grandmother was dispatched or discharged. I'm not sure what DIS stands for, to her brother, and then her sister-in-law was sent to traveler's aid. Women traveling unaccompanied by their husbands weren't allowed off the ship until they had a man to travel with them. And for me, that's just like, oh my God. But back then, that's just the way it was. So societal norms change as well. Have you seen that type of thing come into play with your work?
Always, always. And DIS means discharged into her husband or some other male relative, because we think of slave trading going on today. It happened back then, and there were white slave traders waiting at the boat to collect these women who were unescorted and didn't have anybody to pick them up. So the United States was taking action against that. We see it a lot too with, especially in the 19th century, in the project I'm working on now, women who are committed to insane asylums who were perfectly sane. The project that I'm hoping to write now, and I'm waiting to see how it unfolds, she was committed to an insane asylum twice for her beliefs in spiritualism. Hopefully we wouldn't have that today. But back in the 19th century, that was a very, and early 20th century, that was a very common thing to do. If you spoke out against your husband, if you spoke out against your minister, you were put in an institution because obviously there was something wrong with you. So, and again, we can't pass our morals and our judgment against our ancestors until we know and understand what it was like for them. And throughout my genealogical career, my main thing that I do besides research is write family histories. And I feel that's where a lot of the healing happens. When you write about your ancestors, as you're doing, Lisa, and you put them in historical context, and you make people see that what they were doing was really no different than what anybody else was doing at the time, our ancestors recognize, she understands, she knows me. And that brings healing to them because it's without judgment.
Yeah. Thank you again. This is, I could go in so many different directions in this conversation. I'd like to, if you don't mind, let's go ahead and talk about discovering their stories, because this really, in my experience, this does bring genuine healing to me. And I can feel, because I'm psychically sensitive, I can feel that it ripple effects across the veil. There actually is, it's a subtle healing effect. Talk about what your experience of what does this feel like when you've settled something?
Well, I can give you a very concrete example that wasn't actually very subtle. For years, I had suffered from something called sleep paralysis, where I would wake in the middle of the night and I could not move and I stopped breathing. And at one point, I saw the proverbial white light. And it was like, I'm conscious, I'm awake, but I can't move. I can't even breathe. And I believe my spirit guides were talking to me because I could hear somebody say, roll over, move, and you'll start breathing again. And I would respond and say, I can't move. Roll over so you can breathe. I can't. I'm always on my back at this time. Well, anyway, so I suffered, and it was random. I couldn't pinpoint it to a time of year, to an allergy, to stress. I couldn't pinpoint it to anything. It was just, I never knew when it was going to happen. I saw a sleep doctor, and he diagnosed me with sleep paralysis. And he said, if you can even move a pinky, it'll break the spell, is what he called it. So couple of years go by, I start training with a shamanic practitioner, and I mentioned my sleep paralysis, but that's all I told him. I didn't say anything about it. Well, in the course of my studies, he and I was studying with him privately. He said I took the liberty to do a journey. That's what shamanic practitioners do, is they do a psychic journey to talk with their healing guides, or forget what they call them. They don't call them guides, helpers. And and he says, I took the liberty of talking with my helpers and seeing if we can heal that sleep paralysis. I said, oh, that's good. And he said, and what I saw was your mother with a chain around her ankle, and the chain going to her mother, to her mother, to her mother, to her mother. In genealogy, we call this the umbilical line, or the matrilineal line. It's mother to mother, the mother, the mother. And I just looked at him. I said, well, you're not going to believe this. But when I saw the sleep doctor, I did a DNA study. And I contacted all my relatives, because we come from small families. And I emailed everybody and said, have you ever experienced sleep paralysis? And I described what it was. It was isolated to my mother's side of the family. And so I told him that. I said, well, I think you're spot on about something. And he says, the thing is, it goes back 15 generations. There's some female 15 generations back. Something happened to her. He says, I don't know what. He said, they didn't tell me, but something happened to her that was traumatic. And that has affected each of the females going forward. I said, well, great. What do I do about it? And I write about this in Midlife Medium because what he said to do is set up an altar. And I had told him I had written a book about my matrilineal or umbilical line, my female line. He says, well, on the altar, put the book. And he says, and you do a journey to see what else you need to put on the altar. So I did a journey, and I was told, okay, a white rose and a candle. Okay. So I go to Walmart, I get a TV tray for my altar. I get an artificial white rose, stick it in a vase, and get a battery operated candle. It just goes to show it's just symbolic and ritual. It's not, you don't have to do a real rose and a real candle and a real altar. Anything will do. It's all symbolic, and it's all sending that energy and that vibration out to the ancestors. And he says, and set your intent to heal the line. Because the first thing I did was try to trace back 15 generations, and I didn't get very far. You can't go back that far, especially on a female line. So I did that, and I had it going for, I don't know, a couple of months. And finally, I said to my spirit team, I need a sign. Is this healed or what? I need a sign. Well, on the winter solstice, I think it was 2017 or no, 2016, I think, the winter solstice, a neighbor calls me and says, oh, there's a big bird on the fence on the backyard. I don't know what to do. My dog's going crazy. There's this big bird. And I'm thinking it must be a hawk. We have hawks around here every now and then. I said, well, I'm upstairs. I can look out my bedroom window and see the fence dividing our yards. I look out, and there is a peacock perched on the fence. I live in Salt Lake City, Utah. There are many peacocks here. And I thought, I just got my sign. So my husband grabs a camera to take pictures. I have the picture over my desk to this day. And I thought that must be the sign. Well, so I email my daughter and I tell her about it. She's a skeptic. She doesn't believe any of this anyway, but I tell her about it and she says, oh, that's crazy. And then a few hours later, she emails me back. She is in Hawaii visiting her in-laws. And as they're leaving their in-laws' house, what walks across the road? A peacock. And my daughter had her young daughter at the time, and she was pregnant with her next daughter. And I thought, it's been healed. It gives me the goosebumps. It's been healed backwards and forwards. And my daughter also had sleep paralysis, and we have not had an episode since. Wow. I know. Spooky. I know.
I love stories like that. That's why I do this. I love stories like that. Wow. Did you ever figure out what the rollover instruction was, or did that not really enter into it?
What do you mean by rollover?
When you were in the middle of the sleep paralysis, you were hearing a voice. If you can just roll over, this will break the spell. Did that ever?
Yes. If I could roll over, I would start breathing again. It was something about being on my back. But then when I did move, when I rolled over, everything was fine. The most recent time before the healing, when I saw the white light and I came to, I just laid there for a moment and I could feel, and I was chilled, just chilled, not outside, inside. And I could feel my blood start to circulate again. I could feel it moving. It was the most bizarre experience I've ever had. But yeah, if I could move to break the spell, but this time I moved and broke the spell, because when I saw the white light, I was going towards it. And then somebody was saying, no, no. And I said, yeah, I want to see what's there. And then, no, no. And it felt like a giant shop vac sucking me back into my body. So, and then I was able to move. And like I said, I just laid there and could feel the blood recirculating in my body. I call it almost near-death experience.
Wow. Wow. That's, again, a wonderful story. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, I'm wondering then, people who are watching this who might not have mediumistic abilities. I mean, they probably do. They're just not aware of it yet. Does somebody have to be a medium to heal their ancestors' wounds, or can pretty much anybody do this kind of work?
Anybody can do it. First of all, it's all in your intent. It's all in your intent. I now have a desire to heal this relationship. and putting your thought, and we'll do a little meditation here in just a moment, if that's okay, because it's very simple. It's very simple to send out apologies and to receive and feel forgiveness. And so anybody can do it. And what this meditation is an adaptation of the Heart Math. The Heart Math Institute, you can Google that and read all about it. It's called their Heart Coherence, where you are in your mind and your heart are in coherence and working together. So your thoughts are being sent out with it, which is energy, but the heart has a 60 times greater energy field than our brains do. And so that's what sends out the healing energy. So if you don't mind, we'll just do a quick one, okay?
Absolutely. I would love that. Thank you.
Okay. So we just need to sit, close our eyes, and relax. Take a few deep breaths. And as you're taking in a few deep breaths, bring your awareness to the center of your chest, to your heart. And imagine that you are breathing in and out of your heart instead of your lungs. And as you're doing this, you want to fill your heart with apologies and forgiveness and gratitude for that person that you are sending this healing to. And the thought that you want to heal yourself and heal your relationship, but you feel that in your heart as you breathe in and out through your heart. And with those thoughts and feelings in mind, now imagine that you are expanding those thoughts and feelings, the gratitude, the love, the forgiveness, the apologies. Imagine you are expanding them out all around you, and that the person you want to connect with is feeling what you are feeling. And you can sit with these feelings for as long as you like or as little as you like. The importance is that you felt forgiveness, you felt the apologies, you felt the gratitude and love you want to send that person. And then when you feel ready, bring your awareness back to yourself, back to your regular breathing, and open your eyes. How simple is that?
Easy peasy.
Easy peasy. It doesn't take much. It really doesn't. And if we believe there is no time on the other side, I've never liked, oh, you have to sit for 20 minutes or you have to sit for 30 minutes. Well, if there's no time on the other side, why should there be time when I'm meditating? So just a simple intent to send that person love and forgiveness and gratitude. And that goes out to the universe. That goes to that person because that's your intent. And you can do it as many times as you feel necessary, and it'll be returned to you in some way or form.
Nice. Oh, thank you. I love short and sweet because I find that if anything's really long, I always put it off. Oh, I don't really have time right now. I'll do it later. And then by the end of the day, it's like, whatever. So I like that this was very, very concise and short. Thank you. Perfect.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's coming up as we're talking about, mediumship and listening to messages. I'm feeling compelled to share this story for whatever reason. I think I mentioned this to you the last time we talked, that I've been searching the world literally for a photo of one of my great grandparents, the only one I don't have a picture of. And I haven't been able to find it. And I've been hearing for many years that one of the reasons I'm not finding this picture is she's afraid that I will judge her appearance, that maybe she wasn't very pretty, that I'll look at this picture and go, ew, she's ugly. And I'm trying to figure, in fact, that's what was coming to mind as we've been talking, listen to this. So if it's something as silly as that, how can, well, I personally get beyond the idea that maybe I will. Maybe I'll look at this picture and go, oh, that's what she looked. Oh, I see my worst features in her face. That type of thing. How do we work through something that seems really silly and surface, but is apparently blocking me from finding the records I'm looking for?
Well, and that's certainly possible. This lady I'm researching who was put in the insane asylums, I finally got her picture and I thought, oh dear, how did her husband marry her? I'm sure she didn't appreciate that thought. Maybe that's why I don't have an agent yet for the book. I don't know. But anyway, we also have to remember that people in previous times looked much different than now. While there were people who put an emphasis on appearance, and that could be with this lady, maybe she was self-conscious about her appearance. In fact, she may have been so self-conscious about her appearance that she did not have a photograph taken. So that's another possibility, or she had some kind of disfigurement or deformity or something she was embarrassed about and never had a photograph taken. So we have to consider that as well, as much as we would like to have photographs of all of our ancestors. But I think, again, this is where the social history research is so important. Going through books of photographs of previous generations, we can see they didn't look like us. They may have similar features, but they didn't look like us. They were not attractive people by our standards. By their standards, this woman that I'm researching, I'm thinking, my God, how did she get a husband? There must have been something about her that was appealing. So we have to, just like their actions, we can't judge their actions because we're not in their shoes. We need to try and put ourselves in their shoes. We also need to put ourselves in their place about getting their photographs taken.
Yeah. Thank you again for allowing me to bring my personal questions into this, because I find that when I do see old pictures, whether it's my family or not, when you do genealogy research, you see lots of old photos, and that is sort of a common response, like, oh, look what they're wearing. Oh my God, look at that hairstyle. Why don't any of these people smile? So it is, I think, an interesting thing to think about, the fact that we really are researching different times. I mean, that's a sort of a no-brainer, but it really is a solid piece of important information.
Absolutely. And the no smiling, it was because of photography during that day. When they snapped the picture, the exposure time was so much longer than today. They had to hold that pose. Holding a smile for 10, 15 minutes is very difficult. And so that's why a lot of those early photos, our ancestors aren't smiling. It's not because they weren't happy. It's because the exposure on the cameras then didn't allow for it.
Yeah. Makes sense. Perfect. All right. Well, let's talk a bit about, in your experience, in your view, and in your world, what's the best way to learn more about ancestral healing?
Well, I think the best way to learn about ancestral healing, two things. One is to research your ancestors. And gosh, that's so easy to do now with Ancestry.com and FamilySearch.org. Ancestry.com is a subscription database. FamilySearch.org is free and has many of the same records, not all of the same records, but many of the same records that Ancestry does. I don't want to make it sound like it's easy peasy. It can be, but you have to make sure you're tracing the right ancestors. I mean, it's okay to send healing to somebody who has the same name, but isn't your ancestor. But ideally, you want to work with your own people. So it can be difficult. You have to make sure you are tracing the right people. And that comes with experience, comes with learning how to do some methodology, as well as just picking people's names here and there. So I think that starts the process of healing. Right away, that starts the process of healing. For me, in my experience, the second step is to write their stories. Even if you don't plan to publish them, even if you're just writing it for yourself or you're writing it for the family. In writing it and putting your family into historical context, that means researching the history of the time and the place, women and children. There are plenty of histories about everyday people and what their lives were like, and putting their lives into historical context. That's the other part of the healing process, because then you gain an understanding for their lives. You gain an understanding for what they went through. Because by imagining and empathizing with their struggles, their ordeals, not only are we healing them, but we're realizing, hey, we might have some of the same struggles. We might have some of the same ordeals. We wouldn't want to be judged. I made my decisions because it was the best decision I could make for my situation. They did the same thing too. And it's that understanding between the multiple generations that go on that causes the healing.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. It's so important to learn their stories, because they really do make up who we are, whether it's through epigenetics or just learned behaviors. And I want to, I'm sort of sidetracking. I want to go back to what you were just saying about researching the female lines and the difficulties that we find in just trying to figure out, what did our mothers do, because their last names change. The records aren't as interested in what women did. Is there another way that we can tap into the women in our lines without solid records?
Yes, of course, I'm going to say yes. I'm not going to say, no, there's no way to do that. Yes, there is. I wrote a book. It was several years ago. The book is outdated a bit because the way we research is different, but the sources are all still the same. It's called A Genealogist's Guide to Discovering Your Female Ancestors. And in that book, I break down record sources, or sources, I should say, by those created about women, like the passenger list is created about her. She didn't create it. And those sources created by women. Some of those sources may be needlework, maybe samplers and that kind of thing. Some of it may be letters and diaries. Some of it may be other home sources, recipes and recipe books that can give us clues about our female ancestors' lives. And that book, A Genealogist's Guide to Discovering Your Female Ancestors, it's still available. It's not in print anymore, but is used copies that don't pay a fortune for them. Find a cheap one. They're still available on Amazon. I don't get any royalties from it anymore, so don't pay a lot of money. So I give ideas for other things, other sources in researching women, plus sources you may not think about. For example, a lot of women in the 19th century, not a lot, but a fair share of women in the 19th century petitioned for divorce. But they never went through with it because their children would be taken away from them. But they went ahead and petitioned, and it created a record. And it created an interesting record that talked about her marriage and why she was petitioning for divorce. So again, that's another area that could need healing for her. Somebody is listening. Somebody gets why I petitioned. I never could file for divorce because my children would be taken away from me, but somebody gets that my husband was beating me, and that's why I filed. So there are a lot of records created about women, or women created themselves, or sources that they created themselves that can give us insight into their lives and where some healing might be needed.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of those files aren't yet available online, because I mean it takes time to scan them and upload them and transcribe it. So it's not like everything that exists is available on Family Search or on Ancestry, et cetera. Sometimes you have to actually go to their hometown. So I'm sure you've done this. So in your experience, what's it like to actually walk in the footsteps of the ancestors and to touch the documents that has their ink on it?
Well, first of all, I want to say that you can always hire somebody in the locality to look for records. Like this woman I'm working on who was committed to the insane asylum. There are records at the Historical Society in Connecticut. I have to go there in person to look at them, but I had a Zoom meeting with the Historical Society director, and she went through some of the documents, so I know what's there. So you can do a lot long distance, but there is nothing like walking where your ancestors lived. And when I do that, I'm not necessarily going for the records unless there happens to be letters and diaries that I want to see and read in their own words. I'm going to get a sense of the place. Like with my umbilical line, my matrilineal line, which is Irish, fortunately, the house at the time was still standing. It's since had a fire, unfortunately, but I was able to go and walk where my great grandmother lived and touch the building and touch the bricks and everything where she was. And I think that's also healing for us both, because somebody cares. And isn't that really all we want, is to know somebody cares about us? Nobody wants to die and think they won't be remembered. And the further back you go, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, or whatever, who remembers them? You do. Through your research and your writing, you remember them. You honor them. I want to read you a quote. This came from an article by Dr. Judith Rich. And the article, you can Google it, it's called Healing the Wounds of Your Ancestors. And she said, "You are the one who can heal old wounds for your entire lineage, forgive old enemies, shift conditioning and beliefs, release pain that has been held preceding generations captive for centuries. This is the gift you bring to them." So you're the one who can do it.
Yeah, beautiful. What was the name of the person who wrote that again? I wrote down the title, but I didn't catch
Yeah.
the name.
Dr. Judith Rich, Rich, Healing the Wounds of Your Ancestors.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure I'm not the only one who wanted that repeated. Yeah, I again going back to the mothers, the fact that their last names were dropped. Although sometimes they passed it down as a middle name, but for the most part, the women are the ones who are going to be forgotten more than anyone else. And I think you really hit the nail on the head there, that nobody wants to be forgotten. And so by us remembering them, even if we don't know their last names, even if we never learn their first names, just acknowledging that they existed and they were part of our existence, I think is tremendously healing. Do you agree?
Oh, I totally agree. And genetically speaking, the mitochondrial DNA does not mutate as much as the other parts of the DNA when it's passed down. And the mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA, can only be passed through the female line. So what I inherit as my mtDNA is the same as my grandmother's, my great-grandmother's, my great-great-grandmother's, my great-great, all the way back in that lineage. My memoir, I've written a few books. My memoir, Inheriting the Gordon Hips, was about my search for where did I get these hips? And so I explore the mitochondrial DNA in one of those essays, Inheriting the Gordon Hips, how my DNA, a portion of it, is exactly the same as my ancestor 15 generations ago. There's physical connection. This is not just a line on a pedigree chart. I have the same DNA. I may not have the same DNA as some of my other ancestors because it's mutated so much, but I do for my umbilical line. And it's passed down to my daughter and then to my granddaughters, but it's passed on to the male, but stops. Men cannot pass this on, only women can. So it's an amazing physical connection to our ancestors that most people don't even realize they have.
Wow. Oh my God. I guess I kind of knew that, but I never made the connection that you just drew so clearly. It's, oh my God, it's just, it's mind blowing thinking of, how this just goes back so far and will continue to go forward. And these are the nameless people. They will forever be nameless. Like I know that my mom's dad, they had the same last name for generations back. Her mother's changes every time they would get married. And these are these nameless women, but wow, I don't even have the words to describe the ripple effect that I'm feeling just talking about this. This is powerful mojo, isn't it?
It is. And I do want to say Catholic cultures, the women tended in Europe, the women tended to keep their father's last name in legal records. So for example, my Italian ancestors on the passenger list coming over, they're not recorded by their married name, even though they were married at the time. They're recorded with their father's surname. So if you have Spanish, Italian, Catholic cultures where women were recorded by their father's surname in legal records, that opens the door tremendously. But otherwise, Lisa, you're absolutely correct. Most of them, that's the biggest problem, is figuring out the maiden name. And in A Genealogist's Guide to Discovering Your Female Ancestors, I address that and techniques for that.
Perfect. I know on my mother's lineage, the name, the spelling of the name, because it's a really complex, possibly Polish, possibly Prussian. I don't even really know what country it was because the borderlines changed so much, and the spelling of the last name varies so widely that I don't know if I'll ever really know where these women actually originated. So yeah, I've actually got a copy of that book, so I'm going to have to go tap into that and learn a little bit more about what we're talking about. We are so close to out of time. I've just been gabbing because I'm so fascinated by your work. I want to make sure that I mention your website. You've got two. One is thegenealogymedium.com, and the other one is SharonCarmack.com. What's the difference between those two sites?
The genealogymedium.com focuses more on my mediumship work and my combination of genealogy and mediumship. SharonCarmack.com is my business website with my husband, and that primarily focuses on genealogy research and our genealogy projects. But they both link to each other. So if you get to one, you can find a link for the other.
Okay, perfect. Wow. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Sharon. This has been so interesting. I don't want to let you go. Is there anything that we've left out that you want to make sure that we talk about, or do you feel like we've covered enough?
I think we've covered enough. I just can't stress the importance that if you do nothing else but talk to your relatives about your ancestors, find out who they were from relatives, even that sends out the vibration to them that you're thinking about them, you care about them. That's a good step too. You don't have to do the research. You can just talk to your relatives and find out about your grandparents if they're no longer living, and great grandparents and aunts and uncles. Don't forget the collateral relatives. We call those collateral relatives. Ancestors are the lineage, grandparents, great grandparents, etc. Collaterals are the aunts and uncles and cousins. We all can use healing. So learn as much about your family from talking with your relatives, and the holidays are always a good time for that. But even if it's not around the holidays, you can do it anytime. And at least get started that way and thinking about your ancestors.
All right, good advice. Thank you again, Sharon. This has been such a fun conversation. I so appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate it, the opportunity to talk about something I love so much.
Oh, yeah. Anytime. I want to remind everyone I've been talking with Sharon DiBartolo Carmack, and I want to thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this conversation in the Ancestral Healing Summit.